You begin by noticing your breath. It moves in without effort, and it moves out without being asked. In this gentle rhythm, you allow your thoughts to loosen, like shoes left by the door at the end of a long day. You imagine space, not as a sharp, empty void, but as a vast and quiet ocean, stretched far beyond sight. It is dark, yes, but not cold in feeling. It is calm. It is patient. In this ocean, there is no crashing surf, no storms, only an ancient tide that moves so slowly you almost forget it is moving at all. You float there in your mind, weightless and unhurried, and you notice shapes drifting past you. They are not ships. They are not creatures. They are stones, asteroids. They drift the way smooth rocks drift along the ocean floor, guided by currents too large and too old to notice any single traveler. They do not rush. They do not collide with intention. They simply move, carried by gravity the way seaweed is carried by water. You breathe out softly. These stones are not intruders. They are not invaders. They are not weapons aimed at anything. They are travelers, worn smooth by time, moving through the cosmic tide exactly as they have for ages beyond counting. If you listen closely, you can almost hear them. Not a sound exactly, more like a hum, a distant vibration, the way the ocean sounds when you press your ear to a shell and let your imagination do the rest. You feel your shoulders soften. For a long time, you have been taught to see asteroids as dangers, as sudden visitors, as dramatic events. But here, in this quiet ocean, there is no drama, only motion, only patience. You imagine one stone drifting closer. Its surface is uneven but gentle, shaped not by violence, but by endless time. It turns slowly, catching faint light the way a submerged rock catches sunlight filtered through deep water. This stone has been moving like this longer than memory, longer than stories, longer than names, and somehow that feels comforting. You remember that Earth, the solid ground beneath your feet, was once part of this same ocean. Not this exact ocean, perhaps, but the same cosmic tide. The same slow gathering of drifting matter. The same patient pull. Your planet was shaped by travelers like these. Not all at once. Not loudly, but gently, over time, like sand settling at the bottom of calm water. You rest in that thought. The ground you trust every day was once a drifting stone. The mountains you imagine as permanent were once carried, piece by piece, by invisible currents. Suddenly, space feels less distant, less strange, more familiar. You smile a little because the universe turns out to be a lot like a very old ocean that forgot it was ever new. As you float, you notice how nothing here demands your attention. Nothing flashes. Nothing calls out. Even the light is soft, scattered gently across the slow-turning stones. This is science without urgency, without numbers, without sharp edges. It is simply the observation that matter moves, and that movement can be calm. Asteroids are made of the same basic stuff as planets, but they never quite became one. They are like pebbles that never joined the shore. Not failed, just unfinished. You find that idea strangely soothing. Not everything needs to become something bigger. Some things are allowed to drift complete as they are. Your breathing matches the tide now. The stones continue their slow dance, guided by gravity, the way the moon guides Earth's oceans. You do not see gravity, just as you do not see water moving beneath a still surface. But you feel it. You always feel it. This is how the universe holds itself together. Not with force, but with quiet pull. You imagine placing your hand into this cosmic water. There is no splash, no resistance, only a gentle pressure, like warm air resting against your skin. You chuckle softly at the thought that space, often described as harsh, is being so polite tonight. The stone drifts past you now, continuing on its endless path. It does not notice you, and that feels right. You are not the center of this ocean. You are a listener, and listening feels easy here. As you watch the stone fade into darkness, you feel a question forming. Not a loud question, not an urgent one, just a quiet curiosity. If these stones have been drifting for so long, if they have seen the birth of planets and the settling of worlds, If they carry the memory of how things come together slowly and gently, what stories do they hold? And why only now are you beginning to listen? Your breath flows out, long and soft. The tide pulls you gently closer. You remain floating in the quiet ocean of space, still carried by the same slow tide. Your body feels heavy and light at once, as if gravity has decided to be kind tonight. Your breathing stays slow, unforced, moving in soft loops that match the rhythm around you. A stone drifts nearby again. Not the same one as before, perhaps, but it feels familiar, the way one smooth pebble feels like another when you close your eyes. You notice something new. The stone feels old. Not old in the way of dust or decay, but old in the way a calm voice sounds when it has spoken gently for a very long time. Carries time without strain. It does not hurry to explain itself. Asteroids are not just rocks. They are memories that never learned how to forget. You imagine running your fingers along its surface. It is cool but not cold. Its texture is uneven, yet softened, shaped by endless drifting rather than impact. This stone remembers when everything was quieter than quiet. Before planets had names. Before paths were clear. You feel comforted by that thought. Time here does not press forward. It pools. It settles. These stones formed when the solar system was still deciding what it wanted to become. Not through sudden creation, but through patient gathering, like silt slowly sinking in calm water. You let that image settle in you. Pebbles at the bottom of a river do not rush to be smooth. They simply allow water to pass over them again and again, until sharpness fades without complaint. Asteroids are like that. They have been worn smooth by gravity, by distance, by waiting. Waiting, you realize, is not wasted time. It is how memory is written. Your breath deepens. You think about how humans measure age with numbers and calendars, and how quickly those systems feel small out here. The stones do not count. They remember. Each one carries the quiet record of early warmth, early motion, early gathering. They remember dust becoming grain, grain becoming stone. They remember the slow decision of matter to stay together. And suddenly, science feels less like explanation and more like storytelling whispered after midnight. You smile faintly at the idea that these stones are older than impatience itself. If you listen carefully, you can almost sense layers of time folded gently inside them, like blankets stacked for a long sleep. Nothing is lost. Nothing is erased. Even now, as they drift, they continue to remember. You feel reassured by that steadiness. In a universe that changes constantly, something has chosen to carry its past quietly, without needing attention. You imagine the early solar system as a dim, swirling sea, thick with drifting material. No sharp edges yet, just motion, warmth, and possibility. Asteroids are the pieces that never stopped drifting. Not because they failed, but because drifting was enough. You exhale slowly. There is something soothing about knowing that not everything must arrive at a destination. Some things exist to remember the journey. The stone rotates gently beside you, and you notice tiny variations in its surface. Subtle ridges, soft curves, marks left not by violence, but by time pressing lightly, again and again. This is what memory looks like when it is allowed to be patient. You think about how often you rush to remember, afraid of forgetting. These stones never rush. They trust time to hold what matters. That trust feels contagious. Your muscles relax a little more. The cosmic tide continues its quiet pull, carrying stones, carrying you, carrying everything that has ever learned to move slowly. You begin to understand that these asteroids are not just objects to be studied. They are archives without words, libraries without shelves. They store the feeling of beginnings. And in that feeling there is no urgency, only continuity. Science here does not demand your attention. It invites it. You feel no pressure to understand everything, just to notice. The stone drifts slightly ahead now, as if leading you forward without asking you to follow. You follow anyway, because curiosity, when it is gentle, feels like rest rather than effort. As the stone moves, the darkness around you seems softer, less empty. It feels full of held time, suspended like water before a wave reaches shore. You breathe out, long and slow. If stone can remember this much, if it can hold the story of how worlds begin without ever speaking, what else might it offer? Your breath slows. The current carries you onward. You continue drifting, still moving with the tide, and slowly the darkness of space begins to thin. Ahead of you, Earth comes into view, round and familiar, glowing softly like a lantern seen through mist. You feel a subtle shift inside yourself, the way you do when returning home after a long, quiet walk. Your breathing remains slow. From this distance, Earth looks smooth and calm, wrapped in thin clouds that move like breath across sleeping lips. Nothing looks broken from here. Nothing looks wrong. As you drift closer, you begin to notice texture. Not damage exactly, more like marks of use. Lines where mountains were opened. Soft shadows where land was turned over and reshaped. Scars, perhaps, but quiet ones. You do not feel alarmed. You do not feel angry. Instead, you feel tenderness. These marks are not signs of carelessness. They are signs of effort. For a long time, humans reached into the ground the way you might reach into soil while gardening. Careful at first. Hopeful. Learning. The planet gave what it could. Stone. Metal. Hidden layers shaped slowly beneath pressure and time. You feel the weight of that exchange without judgment. Earth has always been generous. Not endlessly, but patiently. Mines appear in your mind not as wounds, but as places where the planet and humanity spoke to one another, sometimes without quite understanding each other's language. There was need. There was learning. There was trial. You notice how easy it would be to turn this into a story of blame. But that is not the story forming here. The story is softer. You sense that humans did not dig because they wanted to harm. They dug because they needed to build, to connect, to light nights, to move forward. Need is not cruelty. It is simply need. Your shoulders relax as you allow that thought to settle. The scars on Earth are quiet reminders that growth always leaves traces. Even trees mark the ground where they stand. From space, you see rivers glinting like threads of light, forests breathing slowly, deserts resting in stillness. Earth does not feel fragile. Feels enduring, and yet you sense fatigue, not exhaustion, just the gentle tiredness of something that has given steadily for a long time. You breathe in softly. The cosmic tide is still with you, connecting this planet to the drifting stones you left behind. The same pull that guides asteroids also shapes continents. Nothing is separate here. You imagine Earth as part of that great ocean, not isolated, but floating within it. A stone that gathered enough material to become a world. That realization brings comfort. Earth was never meant to hold everything forever. It was meant to be part of a larger flow. The thought does not diminish Earth's importance. It deepens it. You sense humanity standing at a quiet threshold, not one marked by urgency or fear, but by reflection. A moment where learning begins to slow down and look around. For generations, the ground provided what was needed. Now, curiosity gently turns outward, not because Earth has failed, but because listening has improved. You feel the softness of that shift. Looking to space is not an act of abandonment. It feels more like offering Earth a chance to breathe a little deeper. The idea settles like a warm blanket. You imagine the minds on Earth slowly resting, their work completed, their purpose acknowledged. Land reshaping itself quietly over time. Plants returning. Stillness spreading gently. No dramatic recovery. Just patience. The tide teaches that nothing heals quickly, and nothing needs to. You notice how your own body responds to this thought. Your jaw loosens. Your brow smooths. Balance does not mean undoing the past. It means choosing what comes next with care. You sense that reaching toward asteroids is not about escaping Earth, but about sharing the work of provision with the wider universe. Like stepping into shallow water so the shore does not erode further. That image feels kind. The cosmic tide returns to your awareness, steady and forgiving. It has carried stones for ages, can carry responsibility too. You float between Earth and space, held by gravity from both sides, and realize that this is where understanding lives. Not in extremes, But in between, you breathe out slowly. The story is not about guilt. It is not about repair through punishment. It is about balance learned gradually, like learning to walk without stomping. You sense the question forming again, quieter now, more thoughtful. Could reaching space help Earth rest? The question does not demand an answer tonight. It is content to linger, like a thought that waits patiently until morning. You let it stay unresolved. A soft inhale. The pull of gravity loosens its grip just a little. You continue drifting, still held by the same slow tide, and you notice something subtle changing. The pull is not stronger. It is simply clearer. You are no longer only looking back at Earth. You are beginning to look outward. Your breath remains slow. The universe does not push you away from home. It does not rush you forward. It simply opens space the way water opens when you begin to float instead of stand. You realize that curiosity is not the same as desire. Curiosity is gentle. It leans forward without grabbing. This is the feeling that draws humanity's gaze toward asteroids. Not hunger, not greed, but a quiet wondering about what else exists within the tide. You imagine standing at the edge of a shoreline, not to escape the land behind you, but to feel the water touch your feet. The shore does not disappear when you step forward. It remains, steady and present. Asteroids appear now like shells scattered far from the familiar beach. Rare, yes, but not glowing with temptation. They simply rest there, waiting to be noticed. You sense that the universe is not offering these stones as prizes. It is offering them as possibilities. That distinction matters. Possibility moves slowly. It waits until understanding catches up. You feel reassured by the idea that the universe does not reward rushing. The tide does not respond to impatience. It responds to rhythm. Technology, you realize, is learning this same lesson. Despite how loud it can seem on Earth, here it feels quieter, more thoughtful. Machines are imagined not as conquerors, but as students. They listen, they pause, they adjust. You smile faintly at the thought that even technology has learned to float before it swims. The reason the tide pulls outward is not because Earth has run out. It is because understanding has grown. You breathe in softly. Long ago, reaching outward would have meant force. Now, it feels more like coordination, like learning when to move and when to let the current carry you. You sense that humanity is beginning to understand that resources are not trophies. They are responsibilities. The universe holds materials not as gifts to be taken, but as parts of a larger balance. Asteroids are not vaults to be emptied. They are tide pools, quiet and limited, meant to be approached carefully. You let that image settle. A tide pool does not belong to the hand that reaches into it. It belongs to the water that fills it, and to the life that depends on it. That understanding feels soothing. The universe is not in a hurry. It never has been. Stars burn patiently. Planets form slowly. Asteroids drift without complaint. So when curiosity turns outward, it does so at the pace of the tide. You feel your body respond to that slowness. Your breathing deepens. Your thoughts stretch out, unaudit. Reaching outward, you realize, is not about expansion. It is about distribution, like stepping into shallow water so the shoreline remains intact. You imagine Earth again, resting a little more easily as attention spreads across the cosmic ocean. Not abandoned, not replaced, simply less burdened. That thought feels kind. The tide continues its quiet pull, not demanding action, only awareness. You are not being called to rush forward. You are being invited to notice what lies beyond familiar horizons. Technology, like a careful swimmer, tests the water first. It extends slowly. It learns balance. You chuckle softly at the idea that even machines hesitate at the edge, unsure at first, respectful of depth. That hesitation feels wise. Curiosity does not mean taking everything within reach. It means learning where not to reach. You sense anticipation forming now, but it is calm, like the pause before sleep rather than the rush before morning. There is something ahead, but it will wait. The tide teaches that movement can be gentle and still meaningful. You float, allowing the pull to guide you just far enough to see more clearly. The shore remains visible behind you. The open water stretches ahead. Between them, there is balance. You breathe out slowly. Learning to reach without taking too much is not a rule. It is a rhythm, and rhythm, once learned, carries you naturally forward. Exhale, you drift farther from shore. You continue drifting, still held by the calm tide, and you notice how the feeling of movement has changed. There is no sense of rushing forward now, only a gentle closeness, like leaning toward something fragile with open hands. Your breath stays slow. You think about the idea of touching something ancient, not grabbing it, not claiming it, just touching it long enough to understand its texture. In this quiet ocean, asteroid mining does not feel like digging. It feels more like brushing dust from an old stone resting at the bottom of clear water. You imagine hands entering the tide. They move slowly, fingers relaxed, careful not to disturb what surrounds them. No splashing, no sudden motions. This is not force. This is permission. Science here is gentle. It begins with observation, with waiting, with learning how something moves before deciding how to move around it. Asteroids drift patiently, and those who approach them must learn the same patience. You sense that the first lesson is stillness. To touch without hurting, you must first match the rhythm of what you are touching. You feel comforted by that idea. You imagine tools that do not bite or tear, but cradle. Soft mechanisms that gather loose material already willing to drift away. Nothing pried loose, nothing forced. The tide provides. You only guide. This kind of science feels almost ceremonial, like a ritual performed slowly with attention, with pauses built in. You smile faintly, amused by how undramatic it all feels. No sparks, no explosions, just careful motion, like tidying a quiet room without waking anyone. Your shoulders relax. You realize how different this feels from the stories often told about progress. There is no conquest here, no victory, only cooperation. Asteroids are not being broken open. They are being approached like guests who have traveled very far and deserve respect. You imagine the subtle movements involved. A device matching the slow spin of a stone. A gentle capture of drifting particles. A careful redirection, like guiding leaves floating on water toward the shore. Nothing sudden, nothing loud. You breathe in softly. The cosmic tide continues its steady pull, reminding you that everything here is already moving. Mining, in this context, is less about action and more about timing. You wait for the right moment, and then you move just enough. That restraint feels soothing. You think about how often humans associate progress with noise and speed. Here, progress is almost invisible. It happens in pauses, in corrections, in the decision to stop before going too far. You feel reassured by the idea that carefulness is not weakness. It is wisdom learned through listening. The tools imagined here feel less like machines and more like extensions of patience. They are designed not to dominate but to respond. You find comfort in that responsiveness. Touching without hurting requires sensitivity. Sensitivity requires attention. And attention, when sustained gently, begins to feel like rest rather than effort. You notice how your own body mirrors this lesson. Your muscles soften. Your breathing becomes almost automatic. You are learning, along with the science, how to move with less strain. The idea settles in you that extraction does not have to mean depletion. Sometimes it means allowing what is already loose to find a new place to rest. That thought feels kind. You imagine dust drifting naturally away from an asteroid, captured softly before it can scatter. Nothing is taken that was not already ready to move. The tide approves. You chuckle quietly at the thought that even space seems to prefer good manners. As you drift, you sense that this approach changes more than just technique. It changes attitude. When you learn to touch without hurting, you also learn when not to touch at all. That awareness feels calming. You realize that the loudest actions are often the least precise, and the most precise actions are almost silent. Here, silence is not emptiness. It is care. The stone you imagine remains whole, drifting on, barely altered by the interaction. It does not feel robbed. It feels acknowledged. You breathe out slowly. Science, in this moment, feels less like control and more like conversation. A conversation carried out through motion, timing, and restraint. You sense that this way of working could only emerge after long listening, after learning from mistakes, after discovering that pushing too hard only creates ripples that spread too far. The tide continues to teach. You feel safe here. Nothing feels urgent. Nothing demands more than you can give. Progress does not have to shout to be real. Can whisper, can move at the speed of comfort. As the imagined interaction fades, the stone drifts on, unchanged in its essence. You drift with it for a moment, sharing the same quiet current. Your breath evens out completely now. This chapter does not end with a breakthrough. It ends with reassurance. That careful touch is enough. That patience is productive. That moving gently can still move things forward. Your breath evens out. The tide remains calm. You remain floating in the calm current. Your body relaxed. Your thoughts unhurried. The tide continues its steady motion, neither faster nor slower, simply present. You breathe in. You breathe out. In this quiet ocean, you begin to imagine machines. Not loud ones, not sharp-edged or demanding, but gentle machines moving the way people move when half asleep, guided more by feeling than by force. They drift. These machines do not stride through space. They float. They adjust. They pause. Like sleepwalkers, they trust the surface beneath them, even when that surface is invisible. Gravity becomes their floor. The tide becomes their guide. You feel comforted by this image. For so long, machines have been described as precise, fast, and relentless. Here, they feel different. They feel patient. You imagine a small robotic explorer approaching an asteroid. It does not rush forward. It waits, matching the slow spin of the stone, listening to its movement the way you listen to your own breath before falling asleep. There is no dramatic contact, just proximity. The machine adjusts itself gently, making tiny corrections, the way a body shifts slightly under a blanket to find comfort. Nothing jerks, nothing strains. You smile softly at the thought that even machines can learn to be careful. These explorers are not programmed for conquest. They are programmed for balance. They drift alongside the stones, learning their rhythm, respecting their pace. If something shifts unexpectedly, the machine does not panic. Pauses. It recalibrates. That pause feels important. In the cosmic tide, rushing only creates imbalance. Patience, on the other hand, keeps everything aligned. You notice how this idea settles into your own body. Your breathing becomes deeper without effort. Your thoughts lengthen, stretching out like slow waves instead of quick ripples. The machines move almost imperceptibly now. Small thrusters whisper rather than push. Movements are planned not for speed, but for harmony. You imagine watching them from a distance. At first, you might think they are not moving at all. But if you stay long enough, you see the drift. Slow, steady, intentional. This kind of movement feels safe. You realize that even technology must learn humility in space. The tide is larger than any design. Gravity does not negotiate, so machines learn to cooperate. They correct their course gently, again and again, like a sleepwalker adjusting steps without ever fully waking. There is something almost tender about it. You breathe out slowly. These machines do not try to dominate their environment. They try to belong within it. You think about how different this feels from the usual stories of machines taking control. Here, control dissolves into coordination, and coordination feels restful. You imagine the machine holding position beside an asteroid for a long time, simply waiting. Waiting is not wasted time here. It is part of the work. The tide continues to pull everything along, and the machine moves with it, never against it. When adjustments are needed, they are small and deliberate. You chuckle quietly at the thought that space engineering looks a lot like someone trying not to wake a sleeping house. Move slowly. Step lightly. Pause often. You feel a quiet trust forming. If machines can be taught to move this gently, perhaps technology itself is learning to rest. That thought feels reassuring. The machines are not alone out here. They are part of the same flow that carries stones, planets, and even thoughts. You notice how this image softens your feelings about the future. Nothing feels rushed. Nothing feels out of control. The cosmic tide remains steady, patient, and forgiving. You imagine the machine making a final, subtle adjustment, settling into perfect balance beside the drifting stone. It stays there, calm and still, like a companion rather than a tool. That companionship feels important. Technology does not have to stand apart from nature. It can learn to float within it. You let that idea rest in you, like a warm weight settling gently into place. Your breathing becomes almost imperceptible now. The machine drifts on, guided by gravity, by careful design, by patience. It does not hurry toward a goal. It stays present with the movement itself. You realize that patience here is not passive. It is active awareness. And awareness, when practiced gently, becomes trust. You feel that trust spreading not just toward machines, but toward the slow unfolding of things in general. The tide hums softly around you. You float, unafraid, unhurried, supported by forces that do not demand your attention, only your cooperation. A quiet thought forms, barely more than a feeling. If patience can guide machines this well, if slow movement can achieve such balance, what happens when patience becomes our greatest tool? You inhale softly. The current steadies you. You continue floating in the steady tide, your body relaxed, your thoughts wide and slow. Nothing presses forward. Nothing pulls you back. You breathe in. You breathe out. The machines you imagined before fade quietly into the background. Still drifting, still patient. Now your attention moves to something less mechanical and more emotional. Abundance. The word arrives softly, without weight. It does not clang or echo. It settles, like a smooth stone placed gently in your palm. You realize that abundance does not feel like excess here. It does not overflow. It does not demand storage or defense. It simply feels like enough. In this cosmic ocean, asteroids are not treasure chests. They are tide pools. You imagine them scattered across the vast shoreline of space, each one holding a quiet collection of materials, shaped by time and movement. Not infinite, not empty, just present. A tide pool does not promise everything. It offers what it can and no more. That idea feels calming. You think about how often abundance on Earth has been framed as accumulation. More, faster, larger. Here, abundance feels different, feels shared. Asteroids do not belong to anyone. They simply exist within reach of those who learn how to approach them carefully. You feel your breathing slow even further as this thought settles. Quiet abundance does not ask to be owned. It asks to be respected. You imagine materials drifting gently from a stone, guided carefully into waiting space. Nothing stripped bare. Nothing left hollow. The tide remains balanced. You sense how this kind of abundance could ease pressure without creating hunger elsewhere. Earth does not disappear from the picture. It remains central, alive, breathing, but it no longer carries everything alone. That image feels like relief. You notice how your body responds to the idea of shared weight. Your chest feels lighter. Your jaw unclenches. Abundance, when quiet, does not excite the nervous system. It soothes it. You imagine systems designed not to extract endlessly, but to pause often, to check, to listen. The tide teaches that taking too much disrupts flow. Taking just enough allows movement to continue. You smile faintly at the simplicity of that lesson. Asteroids, as tide pools, offer moments of gathering, followed by long stretches of rest. The water moves in. The water moves out. Nothing is hoarded. You feel comforted by the idea that future economies might feel more like ecosystems than marketplaces. More circular, more patient. Value here is not about accumulation. It is about balance. You imagine Earth again, its surface calm, its systems less strained. Not because everything has been replaced, but because attention has widened. That widening feels generous rather than greedy. The cosmic tide hums softly, reminding you that abundance has always existed in rhythm, not in piles. Stars share their light. Planets share their gravity. Asteroids share their presence. Nothing here shouts, "Take me." Everything whispers, "Be careful." You breathe out slowly. Quiet abundance does not remove responsibility. It deepens it. When something feels like enough, you stop reaching blindly. You start choosing. That choice feels restful. You imagine a future where resource use feels almost invisible. No dramatic announcements. No frantic counting. Just a steady understanding that needs are met gently, and then paused. Paused long enough for recovery. The tide flows on, unbroken. You feel a soft warmth in this vision, like lamplight filling a room late at night. Nothing sparkles. Nothing dazzles. It is simply warm. You realize that abundance, when quiet, allows sleep. It tells the body that survival is not in question tonight. That reassurance settles deep. You think about how often fear has driven consumption. Fear of running out. Fear of being left behind. Here, fear dissolves. There is no race in the tide. Everything arrives when it arrives. Asteroids do not rush toward usefulness. They wait until understanding meets readiness. You feel gratitude for that waiting. Your breathing becomes so slow you almost forget it is happening. Quiet abundance does not mean unlimited. It means sufficient, and sufficient feels kind. You imagine the tide pools glowing faintly in the distance, not calling attention to themselves, simply existing within the larger flow. They will be there tomorrow, and the next day. No urgency. You smile gently at the thought that the universe seems perfectly comfortable with enough. That comfort spreads into you. You do not need more explanations right now. You do not need conclusions. Just the feeling that balance is possible. That shared abundance can soften sharp edges. That progress can be measured in calm rather than gain. You breathe out, long and slow. The water around you is still. Enough can be enough. A slow breath out. The tide rests quietly with you. You continue to float, supported by the same calm tide, and you notice something subtle. The water changes. Not dramatically, not suddenly, just enough for awareness to rise. Your breath stays slow. In any ocean, even a quiet one, currents shift. They always have. They always will. You feel reassured by that truth. Here, risk does not appear as danger. It appears as information, a gentle tug, a slight change in direction. The tide never hides its movements. It simply asks to be noticed. You imagine drifting along and feeling the water cool slightly against your skin. Not enough to shock you, just enough to invite attention. That is how risk feels here. Not fear, not threat, just feedback. You realize how different this feels from the way risk is often described. There is no alarm sounding, no urgent correction required, only awareness. Asteroids drift, machines drift, and sometimes their paths do not align perfectly. When this happens, nothing breaks, nothing panics. The system pauses. Pausing feels natural in water. You do it instinctively. You stop kicking. You stop reaching. You let yourself float. Mistakes, in this ocean, are eddies. Small circular motions where the water turns back on itself briefly before continuing on. An eddy is not a failure. It is a reminder. It reminds you to slow down, to feel where you are, to adjust gently. You breathe out slowly. The cosmic tide seems to approve of patience. When a machine drifts slightly off course, it does not force its way back. It waits. It listens. Corrects with care. That correction is slow, almost invisible. You feel comforted knowing that caution is not treated as hesitation here. It is treated as intelligence. Learning to pause becomes part of the movement itself. You imagine hovering beside an asteroid as something unexpected happens. A slight shift, a change in spin. Instead of reacting, the system rests. Stillness becomes the response. That stillness feels powerful. You realize that stopping is not the opposite of progress. It is often what keeps progress aligned. The tide teaches this lesson endlessly. Water does not fight obstacles. It slows, curves, it waits. Eventually, it moves on. You notice how this idea settles into your own body. Your muscles soften further. Your breathing becomes almost silent. There is no pressure to be perfect here, only to be attentive. Risk, when framed gently, loses its sharp edges. It becomes part of learning rather than something to avoid. You smile faintly at how forgiving the tide feels. Even when something drifts too fast, the water absorbs the motion. It spreads the energy, calms it. Nothing shatters. You think about how often humans associate progress with pushing forward regardless of conditions. Here, pushing feels unnecessary. Listening is enough. You imagine a moment when everything stops moving for a while. Machines hold position. Stones continue their slow drift. The tide breathes. This pause is not empty. It is full of information. In stillness, imbalance becomes visible. In silence, correction becomes possible. You breathe in gently. The idea that caution itself is progress feels deeply reassuring. It removes pressure. It invites care. Nothing here needs to be rushed because nothing here is fragile in the way fear imagines. The universe has been practicing patience for a very long time. You let that truth wash over you. Eddies form. Eddies fade. The tide continues. You feel safe knowing that even mistakes are carried forward gently, transformed into guidance rather than regret. Learning to pause becomes a skill shared by machines, by stones, by you. You float easily now, trusting the water beneath you. You realize that drifting too fast is not a failure. It is simply a signal to slow down. The tide does not punish. It redirects. You breathe out, long and calm. Stopping is not an end. It is a curve in the flow. And curves are what keep movement smooth. You remain floating, unafraid, supported by a system that allows room for correction, room for rest. The water around you feels steady again. You float, unafraid. You continue floating, carried by the familiar tide, and you notice how calm everything feels when nothing is being claimed. The water does not ask your name. The current does not check for permission. You breathe in. You breathe out. In this vast ocean, ownership feels like a strange idea. You cannot own water. You cannot fence a current. You can only move within it. That realization feels surprisingly soothing. As you drift, the concept of mining begins to change its shape. It no longer feels like taking something away. It feels like borrowing briefly with awareness. You imagine reaching into the tide not to keep what you touch, but to learn from it, and then to let it go. Space in this quiet vision is not territory. It is shared water. Asteroids are not plots of land waiting for flags. They are stones in motion, part of a system too large to be owned. You feel comforted by that scale. Ownership shrinks things. Stewardship expands them. You sense how future approaches to space might be shaped less by rules and more by values. Not laws written to control, but agreements formed to protect balance. The tide hums softly, reminding you that it supports everything without belonging to anyone. You imagine a hand dipping into water. The water flows around it, never captured, never confined. When the hand lifts away, the water remains. That is what mining without ownership feels like. You take what is needed for a moment, and then you return to the flow. Your breathing slows further as this idea settles. You think about how much tension on Earth has come from lines drawn too sharply. Borders, claims, possessions. Here, lines dissolve. The cosmic ocean does not recognize boundaries. It only recognizes motion and balance. You imagine systems designed with this understanding at their core. No single hand holds everything. Responsibility is shared, like the weight of floating itself. That sharing feels light. You notice how your chest rises and falls without effort. Mining, in this sense, becomes an act of caretaking rather than extraction. You watch over the stone while you interact with it. You leave it able to continue its drift. Nothing is stripped bare. Nothing is exhausted. The tide remains whole. You smile faintly at how calm this version of progress feels. No one is racing to claim the first prize. No one is afraid of being left out. There is enough time. You sense that stewardship requires patience more than authority, listening more than asserting. That feels like a skill humanity is still learning, but slowly, steadily. You imagine future explorers approaching asteroids with quiet protocols. Not ownership papers, but shared understanding. This stone will be approached gently. This much will be taken. Then rest will follow. The tide approves of rest. You breathe out softly. You realize that borrowing creates a different relationship than owning. When you borrow, you remain aware of return. When you own, return is forgotten. Here, forgetting feels impossible. The universe is too vast to disappear into possession. You imagine asteroids continuing their drift long after any interaction has ended, unchanged in purpose, still part of the greater flow. That continuity feels reassuring. You are not interrupting the tide. You are momentarily joining it. You notice how this way of thinking eases fear. If nothing must be owned, nothing must be defended. Conflict dissolves into coordination. You feel a gentle warmth in that idea, like lamplight spreading evenly through a room. The tide belongs to no one, yet it supports all movement. That paradox feels peaceful rather than confusing. You let your thoughts slow, looping gently back over the same ideas, not to analyze them, but to rest in them. Shared water, borrowed stone, returned balance. Your breathing matches the rhythm perfectly now. You imagine Earth again, connected to this larger system, no longer isolated in responsibility. Care flows outward, support flows back. Nothing is hoarded. You chuckle softly at how simple the universe makes this lesson feel. Share the water, respect the tide. The idea of mining without ownership stops feeling radical. Feels natural. Natural things tend to endure. You feel gratitude for that endurance. As you float, the tide hums more clearly now. A low, steady reassurance that nothing is lost when care is shared. You remain suspended between stone and water, thought and breath. A quiet wonder settles into you, unhurried and gentle. Can humanity finally learn to borrow instead of take? The question does not demand an answer tonight. It is content to drift alongside you. Your breath slows, the tide hums softly. You continue floating, held by the same steady tide, and you sense a widening calm. The questions from before do not disappear. They simply soften. You breathe in. You breathe out. Ahead of you, the future does not rush toward the present. It drifts. That realization feels like relief. So often, the future is imagined as something fast and demanding, something that crashes into now with alarms and urgency. But here, in this quiet ocean, the future behaves differently. It moves the way the tide moves, slowly, inevitably, without spectacle. You imagine years passing the way waves pass beneath a floating body, one after another, no sharp edges. In this future, asteroid mining exists, but it does not dominate attention. It does not announce itself. It does not glitter. It works quietly, like infrastructure you never think about because it simply functions. You find comfort in that invisibility. Machines drift far from Earth, patient and precise, gathering gently, pausing often. No celebrations, no races, just continuity. You notice how calm your body feels as you imagine this. Your shoulders drop a little more. Your breathing deepens naturally. Earth remains central in this vision. It does not fade. It does not shrink. Instead, it breathes easier. Pressure eases. Extraction slows. Recovery unfolds at its own pace. You imagine landscapes resting, not dramatically healed, just less strained. The planet feels supported rather than saved. That distinction matters. You sense how the cosmic tide now connects everything seamlessly. Earth, asteroids, machines, people. No part feels isolated. You are no longer watching from the edge. You are inside the flow. You realize that the arc of this story has never been about escape. It has been about participation. Participating in a larger rhythm rather than forcing a smaller one. You breathe out slowly. In this future, there are no headlines screaming about resources running out. There is no panic. Instead, there is planning, coordination, patience. Needs are met quietly. Limits are respected. You imagine how different that feels emotionally. Less anxiety, less urgency, more rest. You smile faintly at how ordinary this future seems. No flying cities, no dramatic transformations, just systems that work gently enough to fade into the background. That ordinariness feels like success. The cosmic tide hums around you, steady and reassuring. It has always preferred quiet solutions. Stars do not announce their fusion. Planets do not celebrate their orbits. They simply continue. You imagine children growing up in this future, learning about asteroids the way you learned about rivers. As part of the world, not as something to fear or conquer. That familiarity feels peaceful. You notice how your breathing synchronizes completely with this imagined rhythm. You are no longer waiting for the future. You are drifting alongside it. The idea that progress can be gentle settles deep inside you. It loosens something you did not realize you were holding. You think about how much energy has been spent fearing what comes next. Here, fear has no foothold. The tide has already shown you how things unfold when given time. You imagine asteroid operations continuing quietly for decades, even centuries, without exhausting their purpose. Approach, gather, pause, then drift on. No depletion, no urgency. You feel comforted knowing that nothing here demands perfection. Only care. Mistakes still happen. Pauses still occur. Adjustments are still made. But all of it happens within a system that allows room to breathe. You realize that this future feels sustainable not because it is efficient, but because it is calm. Calm allows attention. Attention allows care. Care allows continuity. The cosmic tide completes its arc in your awareness now. At the beginning, you watched drifting stones. Now you drift with them. You are no longer observing balance. You are part of it. That sense of belonging feels deeply restful. You notice how your body responds to this inclusion. There is no tension left to release, only stillness to enjoy. The future, you realize, does not need to be dramatic to be meaningful. It does not need to prove itself. It simply needs to arrive at the pace of understanding. And understanding, like the tide, cannot be rushed. You breathe in softly. In this drifting future, nothing is forced. Nothing is abandoned. Earth continues. Space continues. And you continue too, floating easily between thought and breath. You sense that the story is gently winding down now, not toward an ending, but toward rest. The tide has done its work. You are no longer fighting currents or searching for answers. You are simply here, carried. The future drifts beside you, quiet and unassuming, content to move at the speed of care. You let that image blur slightly the way images do when sleep draws closer. Your breathing slows to its softest rhythm. One final thought settles like a feather. The future does not need to arrive loudly. It is already here, drifting gently with you. One final breath, weightless. You are still floating. But now you barely notice the movement. The tide has become so familiar that it feels like stillness. You breathe in. You breathe out. Nothing else asks for your attention. The stones drift on somewhere beyond thought. The machines move quietly, patiently, far away. Earth rests, held gently in the same vast flow. You do not need to picture them anymore. The images soften like shapes seen through closed eyelids. What remains is feeling. You notice the weight of your body where it rests, the way warmth gathers naturally, the way breath continues without instruction. In this moment, science is no longer something you are learning. It is something you are feeling. The universe breathes. You breathe. There is no difference worth naming. The cosmic ocean that once felt wide and mysterious now feels close, almost intimate, like a blanket pulled up gently, like a familiar room at night. You are not traveling anymore. You are arriving. Your thoughts slow not because they are told to, but because they have nowhere else to go. No urgency remains. No curiosity needs answering. Even questions are allowed to rest. You feel how the tide supports you without effort. You do not have to float well. You are simply floating. That simplicity feels kind. The ideas from earlier drift through your awareness one last time. Lighter now. Stones remembering. Earth resting. Care replacing force. They do not form sentences anymore. They form calm. You smile faintly, maybe without even meaning to, at how quiet everything has become. The universe does not insist on being understood tonight. It is content to be felt. You sense how long it has been moving this way, slowly, patiently, long before you noticed. That thought does not feel small. It feels comforting. You are not late. You are not behind. You are exactly where the tide has carried you. Your breathing becomes deeper, then softer. Long pauses appear naturally between breaths. In silence stretches not empty, but full. The stones continue drifting, but you no longer follow them. They do not need your attention to exist. The tide does not need your effort to move. You do not need to hold anything together. That responsibility dissolves gently. You notice how your muscles release one by one, like lights dimming in a house at night. Nothing shuts off abruptly. Everything fades. The future you imagined earlier no longer feels ahead of you. It feels distant, like something already handled. Tomorrow can wait. Tonight is only for floating. You feel a soft gratitude without aiming it at anything specific. Not gratitude for answers, just gratitude for rest. The cosmic ocean hums so quietly now that it blends with your own inner silence. There is no edge between you and the tide. No boundary worth keeping. You are held by gravity, held by motion, held by time moving at a pace that never rushes. The stones drift, the planets turn, the universe continues its long, patient rhythm, and you are allowed to stop paying attention. Sleep approaches the way the tide approaches shore. Gradually, without announcement, your thoughts blur, stretching into soft shapes that do not need names. Breath becomes the only motion you notice. Nothing else matters. Science has finished speaking for the night. It leaves you with sensation instead of explanation. Warmth, weight, stillness. You are no longer listening for the tide. You are inside it. The universe moves slowly, and so can you.